The autumn wind carried the scent of pine and danger across the New Mexico territory as Marcus Sullivan guided his horse along the narrow mountain trail. The year was 1887, and the former cavalry scout had spent the last 3 months working as a surveyor for the railroad company, mapping routes through Apache ancestral lands under the latest government treaty. Marcus had served in these mountains before, during the final campaigns against Geronimo's band, but those days felt like another lifetime. Now 34 years old, with graying temples and eyes that had seen too much violence, he carried only surveying instruments instead of a rifle. His weathered hands held the reins with practiced ease as his mare, Duchess, picked her way carefully down the rocky slope toward the valley below. The sun hung low on the horizon, painting the rugged landscape in shades of gold and crimson. Marcus had planned to reach the trading post at Cedar Springs before nightfall, but a broken wagon wheel that morning had cost him precious hours. Now, darkness approached faster than he liked in this remote country, where Apache bands still moved freely despite the peace treaties signed in distant Washington. As Duchess rounded a bend in the trail, Marcus heard something that made him pull up short. Voices carried on the evening air, speaking in rapid Apache. His years of frontier service had taught him enough of the language to catch fragments of meaning, and what he heard chilled his blood. 2 female voices, young and frightened, pleading desperately with their captors. Marcus dismounted silently and crept forward through the ponderosa pines until he could see into a small clearing below. 3 men sat around a cooking fire, their horses hobbled nearby. They wore a mixture of traditional Apache dress and stolen cavalry gear, marking them as renegades operating outside tribal authority. 2 young Apache women, barely more than girls, sat bound with rawhide strips near the fire. Their torn clothing and the bruises on their faces told a grim story. The leader of the group, a scarred warrior with a cavalry officer's coat draped over his shoulders, gestured angrily at the captives while speaking in harsh tones. Marcus understood enough to know they were arguing about what to do with the women. The other 2 men, one missing his left arm and another with a deep knife scar across his cheek, seemed to be pushing for immediate action that would end badly for the prisoners. Marcus studied the scene carefully, his surveyor's mind automatically calculating distances and angles. The camp sat in a natural bowl surrounded by rocky outcrops with only 2 viable approaches. The renegades had positioned themselves well, but they had also trapped themselves in a location with limited escape routes. Their fire cast dancing shadows that would work both for and against any rescue attempt. The older of the 2 captives appeared to be perhaps 18 years old, with the bearing of someone from an important family. Her companion looked younger, maybe 15, and trembled with fear as the scarred leader approached their position. Marcus felt his jaw clench as the man reached down to touch the younger girl's face with mock gentleness that promised violence. Moving back to his horse, Marcus quickly considered his options. 3 armed men against 1, with innocent lives hanging in the balance. In his cavalry days, he would have ridden for help, but the nearest military post lay 2 days hard riding away. By then, whatever these renegades planned would be finished. The women would be dead or worse. Marcus checked his weapons with methodical precision. His Colt .45 carried 6 rounds, with 18 more in his belt. A Winchester rifle hung in his saddle scabbard, fully loaded with 15 cartridges. Not much firepower against 3 desperate men, but it would have to suffice. More importantly, he carried something the renegades lacked: the element of surprise and knowledge of Apache tactical methods learned during years of fighting alongside friendly scouts. As full darkness settled over the mountains, Marcus began to move. He led Duchess away from the trail and tethered her in a grove of aspen trees, where she would be safe but accessible for a quick escape. The surveyor's instruments went into his saddlebags, replaced by extra ammunition and a hunting knife his grandfather had carried during the Mexican War. The temperature dropped rapidly once the sun disappeared behind the western peaks, and Marcus pulled his wool coat tighter as he worked his way down toward the renegade camp. Years of frontier living had taught him to move silently through the wilderness, reading the terrain like a map and avoiding loose stones or dry branches that might betray his presence. From his new position on the rocky ridge overlooking the clearing, Marcus could see the situation had worsened. The leader had produced a bottle of whiskey, and all three men were drinking heavily while discussing their plans in increasingly crude terms. The older captive sat straighter despite her bonds, trying to shield the younger girl with her own body. Their courage in the face of terror reminded Marcus why he had once worn a cavalry uniform with pride. The scarred leader suddenly stood and walked toward the prisoners, swaying slightly from the alcohol. He grabbed the older girl by her hair and dragged her to her feet, speaking in rapid Apache while his companions laughed. Marcus could see tears on the younger captive's face, but she made no sound. These were daughters of a proud people, determined to face their fate with dignity. Marcus made his decision. Moving carefully along the ridge, he positioned himself above the camp where shadows from the rock formations would conceal his approach. The renegades had grown careless with drink and confidence, their weapons leaning against rocks or lying beside their bedrolls. Only the leader still wore his sidearm, an old Remington revolver thrust through a cavalry gun belt. The plan that formed in Marcus's mind was simple but dangerous. Apache warriors respected courage above all else, and these renegades, despite their criminal actions, would understand the language of a direct challenge. If he could eliminate the leader quickly and position himself advantageously, the other two might surrender, rather than face certain death in a prolonged gunfight. Marcus began his descent into the camp, using every skill learned during years of Indian fighting. Each step was placed with infinite care, each movement calculated to avoid detection. The renegade's fire had burned down to glowing coals, providing just enough light to see shapes, but creating deep pockets of shadow perfect for concealment. 20 feet from the edge of the clearing, Marcus paused behind a fallen log to make final preparations. He drew his Colt and checked the loads one more time, then pulled his knife and held it ready in his left hand. The Winchester remained slung across his back, a reserve weapon for the fight he hoped to avoid. The scarred leader had dragged the older captive to the opposite side of the fire and was forcing her to kneel while he drew his own knife. His two companions watched with drunken interest, occasionally calling out suggestions or crude encouragement. None of them noticed the shadow that detached itself from the darkness and began moving toward their camp with deadly purpose. Marcus crept to within 10 feet of the nearest renegade, the one-armed man who sat with his back to the approaching danger. The surveyor could hear the man's breathing, smell the whiskey on his clothes, and see the scalps hanging from his belt. Old anger stirred in Marcus's chest, memories of good soldiers killed by men like these, but he forced himself to remain calm and focused. The moment came when the leader raised his knife above the bound captive. Marcus exploded from the shadows like an avenging spirit, his own blade finding the one-armed renegade's throat before the man could cry out. In the same fluid motion, he rolled sideways and put 2 bullets into the scarred warrior with the knife, dropping him before he could harm his prisoner. The third renegade, shocked into temporary sobriety by the sudden violence, fumbled for his rifle while shouting in Apache. Marcus put a bullet through his shoulder, spinning him around and sending the weapon flying into the darkness. The man fell hard, clutching his wounded arm and screaming curses at his unseen attacker. Silence fell over the clearing, broken only by the crackle of dying embers and the wounded man's groans. Marcus kept his pistol trained on the survivor while moving quickly to check on the 2 captives. Both women stared at him with wide eyes, uncertain whether this new arrival represented salvation or simply a different kind of danger. The older captive spoke first, her voice steady despite everything she had endured. She spoke in accented English, clearly educated by missionaries or traders. Her words carried the dignity of someone from an important family, and Marcus felt a stir of recognition. This was not just any Apache maiden, but someone whose rescue might have consequences far beyond this single night. Marcus cut their bonds with efficient movements while keeping one eye on the wounded renegade. Both women were weak from their ordeal, but unbroken in spirit. The younger one clung to her companion, tears finally flowing now that immediate danger had passed. The older captive helped her friend stand while studying Marcus with intelligent eyes that seemed to measure his character. The wounded renegade tried to crawl toward his fallen rifle, prompting Marcus to fire a warning shot that sent splinters flying from the weapon's stock. The man stopped moving and glared with hatred that promised future trouble if he survived. Marcus faced a difficult decision about what to do with a wounded enemy who would certainly seek revenge if allowed to live. The older captive seemed to read his thoughts. She spoke again in English, explaining that the wounded man was known to her people as a killer of women and children, cast out from his own band for crimes too terrible to tolerate. Justice and practical necessity pointed toward the same conclusion, but Marcus found himself reluctant to execute a helpless prisoner, even one who deserved no mercy. The decision was taken from his hands when the wounded renegade made a final desperate lunge for a hidden knife. Marcus's bullet took him in the chest, ending both the immediate threat and any further moral dilemma. 3 men had entered this clearing planning terrible crimes against innocent women. Now they would never harm anyone again. Marcus holstered his weapon and turned his full attention to the rescued captives. Both young women bore the marks of their ordeal, but neither seemed seriously injured beyond cuts and bruises. The older one introduced herself as Ayana, daughter of Chief Nalnish of the Chiricahua band that had recently settled on the new reservation. Her companion was Itzel, a cousin visiting from another band. The rescue had succeeded, but Marcus realized their troubles were far from over. 3 horses stood among the renegade's possessions, along with supplies and weapons that would prove useful for the journey ahead. More importantly, getting 2 young Apache women safely back to their people would require careful navigation of both the physical landscape and the complex political situation surrounding the recent peace treaties. Dawn broke cold and clear over the mountain clearing, where 3 bodies lay beside the ashes of a dead fire. Marcus had spent the dark hours before sunrise preparing for the journey ahead, gathering supplies from the renegade's camp, while the 2 rescued women rested beneath his spare blanket. Ayana had proven herself remarkably resilient, helping to tend Itzel's injuries and speaking quietly with her traumatized companion in their native tongue. As the first light touched the eastern peaks, Marcus studied his charges with growing concern. Both young women were stronger than they appeared, but the ordeal had taken its toll. Itzel especially seemed fragile, starting at sudden sounds and clinging to Ayana's hand whenever possible. The older girl bore herself with quiet dignity, but Marcus caught glimpses of pain in her dark eyes when she thought no one was watching. Marcus had learned enough Apache customs during his cavalry years to know that bringing these women safely home involved more than simply pointing them toward their reservation. Honor demanded proper protocols, especially since Ayana had identified herself as Chief Nalnish's daughter. The old chief commanded respect even among former enemies, known for his wisdom and his careful navigation of the new relationship with the American government. The horses presented the first practical challenge. The renegades had ridden good stock, probably stolen from ranches or trading posts, but none were trained for the careful mountain travel required to reach the Chiricahua reservation. Marcus selected the best mare for Ayana, a steady chestnut with intelligent eyes and sure footing. Itzel would ride with him on Duchess, at least until her strength returned. Ayana accepted the horse with a grateful nod, then surprised Marcus by demonstrating remarkable riding skill as she vaulted onto the mare's back with fluid grace. Despite her torn dress and the bruises marking her ordeal, she sat the horse like a warrior born to the saddle. Her companion managed a weak smile at this display of strength, the first genuine expression of hope Marcus had seen from the younger girl. The abandoned camp told its own grim story as Marcus completed his preparations. Personal items scattered around the fire revealed that the renegades had been living as bandits for some time, preying on travelers and isolated homesteads. A collection of scalps and jewelry suggested previous victims who had been less fortunate than Ayanna and Itzel. Marcus felt no regret for the 3 dead men as he scattered their remains for the scavengers. Setting out toward the southeast, Marcus led the small party along game trails that wound through the high country toward the distant reservation. The route would take them through some of the most beautiful and dangerous terrain in the territory. Following ancient Apache paths that had been used for countless generations, Ayanna proved an invaluable guide, pointing out landmarks and suggesting modifications to their course that would avoid both military patrols and areas where other renegade bands might be operating. The morning passed in relative silence, with each member of the party lost in their own thoughts. Marcus found himself impressed by Ayanna's knowledge of the country and her ability to read sign that he missed entirely. She pointed out day-old tracks of unshod ponies, the remains of a hunting camp used weeks earlier, and water sources that would have been invisible to an untrained eye. Her education had clearly included traditional Apache woodcraft, as well as the English language lessons provided by missionaries. Around midday, they stopped beside a clear mountain stream to rest the horses and share the limited food supplies Marcus had gathered from the renegade camp. Ayanna helped Itzel wash her face and hands, speaking gently to her cousin in Apache while braiding her disheveled hair with practiced movements. The simple act of restoring dignity and cleanliness seemed to strengthen both women, and Itzel managed to eat a small portion of dried meat and hardtack. During their rest, Marcus learned more about the circumstances that had led to the women's capture. They had been traveling between Apache bands with a small escort of warriors carrying messages between chiefs about upcoming council meetings. The renegades had ambushed their party near a water hole, killing 2 guards and scattering the horses before taking the women prisoner. The attack had occurred 3 days earlier, meaning search parties would already be looking for the missing travelers. Ayanna spoke with quiet anger about the renegades who had taken them, explaining that all 3 men had been cast out from various Apache bands for crimes against their own people. They represented the worst elements of a society struggling to adapt to confinement on reservations, men who had chosen violence and banditry over the difficult path of peace that their leaders were trying to follow. Their deaths would not be mourned by any honorable Apache. As they resumed their journey, Marcus began to understand that he was involved in something far more significant than a simple rescue. Ayanna was not merely Chief Nalnish's daughter, but a respected voice in tribal councils and an advocate for peaceful relations with the American government. Her safe return would strengthen the chief's position among those who supported the new treaties, while her death or dishonor would have provided ammunition for war leaders who argued that cooperation with whites was impossible. The afternoon brought them into increasingly familiar territory as they descended toward the reservation boundaries. Marcus recognized landmarks from his surveying work and previous military service, but Ayanna's knowledge of the landscape far exceeded his own. She led them around hidden canyons and through narrow passes that would have been impossible to find without intimate knowledge of the terrain. Late in the day, they encountered the first sign that they were approaching inhabited areas. Smoke from cooking fires rose from a distant valley, and Ayanna pointed out mounted figures moving along a ridge several miles away. Apache scouts, she explained, part of the search parties that had been looking for the missing women since the ambush was discovered. Their rescue was about to become known to her people. The reunion with the search party proved both emotional and carefully choreographed according to Apache customs. The lead scout, a weathered warrior named Cochise, after the famous chief, approached slowly with his rifle across his saddle. He called out in Apache, and Ayanna responded with formal words that Marcus recognized as a traditional greeting between relatives. Only then did the scout's stern expression break into a smile of relief. Itzel wept openly when she recognized her own father among the search party members. The older man dismounted and embraced his daughter gently, speaking soft words of comfort while examining her injuries with the careful attention of someone who had feared the worst. Other warriors gathered around Ayanna, treating her with the respect due to a chief's daughter, while expressing their joy at finding both women alive and relatively unharmed. Marcus found himself the object of intense scrutiny as Ayanna explained the circumstances of their rescue. The Apache warriors listened in silence as she recounted the events of the previous night, describing Marcus's courage in attacking 3 armed men to save women he had never met. Their dark eyes studied the white surveyor with expressions that revealed nothing of their thoughts about his actions. Cochise finally approached Marcus directly, speaking in careful English learned during years of dealing with army officers and government agents. His words carried formal dignity as he expressed the gratitude of Ayanna's family and acknowledged the debt that her rescue had created. Marcus deflected the praise, saying only that he had done what any decent man would do when confronted with such a situation. The truth was more complex than Marcus's modest words suggested. His decision to risk his life for 2 Apache strangers had been driven by instincts deeper than mere duty or humanitarian concern. Something about their courage in the face of terror had reminded him of why he had originally joined the cavalry, before years of border warfare had hardened his heart against the very people he was now trying to protect. As evening approached, the expanded party made camp in a sheltered canyon that showed signs of frequent use by Apache travelers. The warriors went about the familiar routines of caring for horses and preparing food, while Ayanna and Itzel were given space to rest and recover from their ordeal. Marcus found himself accepted as a guest, but remained aware that his presence among these people represented a delicate balance of trust and suspicion. Cochise shared his evening meal with Marcus, using the opportunity to learn more about the white man who had rescued their women. Marcus spoke honestly about his background as a cavalry scout and his current work as a surveyor, explaining his familiarity with Apache ways and his respect for the fighting abilities of warriors like those who now surrounded him. The conversation revealed mutual recognition of professional competence, if not yet friendship. The night passed peacefully, with Apache sentries maintaining watch while the camp slept. Marcus dreamed of cavalry charges and burning settlements, memories from a time when he had fought against men who were now offering him their hospitality. He woke several times to find Cochise or another warrior checking on his welfare, small gestures that demonstrated their growing acceptance of his presence among them. Morning brought preparation for the final stage of their journey to the main Apache camp, where Chief Nalnish waited for news of his missing daughter. Ayanna had recovered much of her strength and dignity during the night, while Itzel seemed more alert and responsive to her surroundings. Both women had been provided with traditional clothing by the search party, replacing their torn garments with beautifully decorated dresses that restored their status as honored daughters of their people. Marcus realized that his own appearance would require attention before meeting the chief. His clothes bore the stains and tears of the previous night's violence, and his stubbled face hardly presented the image of a respectable man deserving of Apache hospitality. Cochise seemed to understand this concern, providing Marcus with clean water and time to shave and repair his clothing before they set out for the final approach to the main camp. The route to Chief Nalnish's camp took them through country that Marcus had helped survey months earlier, but seeing it now through Apache eyes gave him a new perspective on the landscape. Every hill and valley held memories of hunting expeditions, battles, and seasonal migrations that stretched back countless generations. This was not empty wilderness waiting for railroad development. but a homeland rich with spiritual and practical significance for its native inhabitants. As they approached the reservation boundaries, Marcus found himself thinking about the complex politics that governed relations between the Apache people and the American government. The treaties signed in Washington seemed simple enough on paper, but their implementation required constant negotiation and compromise from leaders like Chief Nalnish, who were trying to preserve their people's survival while adapting to an entirely new way of life. The rescue of Nalnish's daughter had thrust Marcus into the middle of these delicate relationships, making him a participant in events that could influence the future of both races in the territory. His actions during one dark night had created obligations and opportunities that neither he nor the Apache leaders could have anticipated, setting the stage for encounters that would test the possibility of genuine understanding between former enemies. As the familiar outline of the main Apache camp appeared in the distance, Marcus felt a mixture of anticipation and uncertainty about what awaited him there. He had saved 2 lives during the darkness, but the full consequences of that decision would only become clear when he faced Chief Nalnish and learned how the Apache people intended to honor their debt to the white surveyor who had risked everything for strangers in need. The Apache camp spread across a natural meadow surrounded by towering pines, its traditional wickiups and canvas army tents creating a unique blend of old and new ways. Smoke rose from cooking fires where women prepared the midday meal, while children played games that had been passed down through countless generations. Warriors tended horses and repaired equipment, their faces bearing the weathered dignity of men who had adapted their ancient skills to a changing world. Chief Nalnish emerged from his lodge as the returning party approached, his presence commanding immediate attention from everyone in the camp. Despite being past 60 years of age, the chief moved with the fluid grace of a natural athlete, his gray hair braided with traditional ornaments that caught the sunlight. His dark eyes swept over the group until they found his daughter, and Marcus saw a flash of emotion cross the old warrior's stoic features. Ayanna dismounted and walked to her father with measured steps that revealed both respect and genuine affection. They spoke briefly in Apache, their voices too low for Marcus to hear, but he could see the relief in Nalnish's posture as he satisfied himself that his daughter was truly unharmed. The chief's examination was thorough but gentle, checking for injuries while listening to her quiet report about their rescue and the journey home. Marcus remained mounted beside Cochise, uncertain of the proper protocol for this moment. His surveying work had brought him into contact with various Apache leaders, but always in formal settings where his role was clearly defined. Now he found himself in the heart of their community, a white man who had become entangled in family matters of the highest importance to one of the most respected chiefs on the reservation. Chief Nalnish turned his attention to Marcus with the measured consideration of a man accustomed to making decisions that affected the lives of his people. His English, when he spoke, was careful and precise, learned during years of negotiating with army officers and government agents. The formal words of gratitude he offered carried weight beyond their simple meaning, representing an acknowledgement of debt that would have consequences neither man could fully foresee. Marcus dismounted and found himself guided toward the chief's lodge by several warriors who treated him with respectful courtesy. The interior of the dwelling reflected the same blend of traditional and modern elements he had observed throughout the camp, with army blankets and government-issued supplies mixed with beautiful examples of Apache craftwork. Buffalo robes covered the floor, while weapons both old and new hung from the lodge poles. The women of the family had gathered to welcome Ayanna home, their relief and joy evident despite the formal dignity they maintained in the presence of a stranger. Marcus was introduced to Nalnish's wife, Desba, a woman whose quiet strength and intelligent eyes immediately explained where her daughter had inherited her remarkable composure. Other female relatives clustered around Ayanna and Itzel, examining their injuries and listening to their account of the rescue with expressions that revealed both gratitude and amazement. Desba approached Marcus with a directness that surprised him, speaking in accented English while studying his face with the same intensity her husband had shown. Her questions about the rescue were specific and detailed, seeking to understand not just what had happened, but why a white surveyor had risked his life for Apache strangers. Marcus answered honestly, explaining that he could not have lived with himself if he had ridden away from such a situation without acting. The afternoon passed in a series of formal ceremonies that Marcus recognized as essential elements of Apache hospitality, but which carried deeper meanings related to his unique position in their community. Food was shared with elaborate courtesy, stories were told that seemed designed to educate him about tribal history and values, and gifts were exchanged that created bonds of mutual obligation between guest and hosts. Throughout these rituals, Marcus became aware that his presence was drawing attention from throughout the camp. Warriors found excuses to pass near the chief's lodge, while women and children observed from respectful distances. Word of the rescue had spread quickly, and he realized that his actions were being evaluated not just by Nalnish's immediate family, but by the entire community. The story of a white man risking his life to save Apache women was apparently unprecedented in their experience. As evening approached, Chief Nalnish requested a private conversation with Marcus outside the lodge. The two men walked to a slight rise overlooking the camp, where they could speak without being overheard. The chief's questions revealed a sophisticated understanding of the political implications of recent events, as well as genuine curiosity about Marcus's background and motivations. Marcus learned that the three dead renegades had been more than simple bandits. Their leader, the scarred warrior whose death had ended the immediate threat, was the brother of a war chief who still advocated violent resistance to the reservation system. His death at the hands of a white man could be interpreted as either justice for his crimes or an act of aggression that demanded revenge. The delicate balance of peace that leaders like Nalnish worked to maintain could be threatened by misunderstandings about the circumstances. The chief's solution to this potential problem revealed the sophisticated political thinking that had enabled him to guide his people through the difficult transition from warfare to reservation life. Rather than simply releasing Marcus with expressions of gratitude, Nalnish proposed a formal ceremony that would publicly establish the surveyor's status as a friend and ally of the Apache people. Such recognition would provide protection against revenge seekers while demonstrating the tribe's commitment to honoring those who acted with courage and honor. Marcus accepted the proposal with growing understanding of its significance, but nothing had prepared him for what Chief Nalnish revealed about the specific form the ceremony would take. Tradition demanded that the rescue of the chief's daughter be acknowledged through one of the highest honors Apache culture could bestow upon an outsider, a recognition that would permanently alter Marcus's relationship with the tribe and their view of white people in general. The ceremony began at sunset, with the entire camp gathering in a circle around a central fire that had been built according to ancient customs. Warriors painted their faces with traditional designs, while women wore their finest clothing, creating a scene that reminded Marcus of gatherings he had observed during his cavalry days, but never expected to participate in as an honored guest, rather than a potential enemy. Chief Nalnish spoke at length in Apache, his words carrying across the hushed gathering as he recounted the story of his daughter's rescue in formal language that transformed recent events into the kind of tribal legend that would be remembered for generations. Marcus understood enough of what was being said to recognize that his actions were being placed in the context of Apache values of courage, honor, and protection of the innocent. Ayanna was called forward to add her own testimony about the rescue, her clear voice describing Marcus's courage in facing 3 armed enemies to save strangers he had never met. Her words drew murmurs of approval from the gathered warriors, who clearly appreciated both her survival and the tactical skill that had made it possible. The young woman's dignity and strength were evident as she spoke, demonstrating why her rescue had been worth any risk. When the formal recitations were complete, Chief Nalnish called Marcus forward to the center of the circle. The surveyor found himself standing before the entire Apache community, aware that whatever was about to happen would mark a turning point in his life that he could not have imagined when he first heard voices calling for help in the darkness 2 nights earlier. Desba appeared beside her husband carrying a bundle wrapped in doeskin that she handled with obvious reverence. Her movements were slow and ceremonial as she unwrapped what Marcus quickly recognized as one of the most sacred objects in Apache culture, a medicine bundle containing spiritual items passed down through generations of the chief's family. The fact that such a treasured possession was being displayed at all indicated the extraordinary nature of what was about to occur. Chief Nalnish's words, when he returned to English for Marcus's benefit, carried the weight of momentous decision. He explained that Apache tradition recognized certain acts of courage and honor that transcended the boundaries between peoples, creating obligations that could only be satisfied through the most sacred ceremonies of adoption and acceptance. Marcus's rescue of Ayana had placed him in this category, earning him a recognition that no other white man had ever received from the Chiricahua Apache. The ceremony that followed was unlike anything Marcus had experienced or imagined. Sacred songs were sung while warriors danced around the fire, their movements telling the story of courage and protection that had brought this moment into being. Women added their voices to the celebration, while children watched with wide eyes as their elders performed rituals they might never see again. But it was Desba's final gesture that truly shocked Marcus and everyone else present. The chief's wife approached him carrying a beautifully crafted war shirt that had belonged to her eldest son, killed in the final campaigns against the cavalry years earlier. With tears streaming down her weathered cheeks, she offered the sacred garment to Marcus while speaking words that Chief Nalnish translated with obvious emotion. Desba was formally adopting Marcus as her son, replacing the warrior she had lost with the man who had saved her daughter. The war shirt represented not just clothing but identity, carrying with it all the spiritual and social significance of membership in one of the most important Apache families. By accepting it, Marcus would become something unprecedented, a white Apache warrior with all the rights and responsibilities that status entailed. The silence that followed Desba's offer was profound, broken only by the crackling of the ceremonial fire and the whisper of wind through the pines. Every person in the gathering understood the magnitude of what was being offered, and the courage required for an Apache mother to extend such recognition to a former enemy. This was the shocking gesture that would be remembered and retold for generations, regardless of Marcus's response. Marcus looked into Desba's tear-filled eyes and saw not just gratitude, but genuine maternal affection born from his actions in saving her daughter. The war shirt in her hands represented a bridge between 2 worlds that had been at war for decades, an opportunity to prove that understanding and respect could exist between Apache and white people who approached each other with honor and courage. With trembling hands, Marcus accepted the sacred garment while speaking words of gratitude that seemed inadequate for the magnitude of what he was receiving. As Desba helped him put on the war shirt, transforming him symbolically from surveyor to Apache warrior, cheers erupted from the assembled tribe. The sound echoed across the mountains, announcing to the world that something unprecedented had occurred in the relationship between 2 peoples. The celebration that followed lasted until dawn, with feasting and storytelling that welded Marcus permanently into the fabric of Apache tribal memory. Warriors who had fought against the cavalry shared their respect with a former scout who had proven his worth through actions rather than words. Women who had lost sons and husbands in the border wars accepted him as family, recognizing that courage and honor transcended the artificial boundaries created by race and politics. As the sun rose over the reservation, Marcus stood beside Chief Nalnish, wearing his new identity as both surveyor and Apache warrior. The transformation was more than ceremonial. It represented a new kind of relationship between peoples who had spent too many years seeing each other only as enemies. Through one night's courage, a white man had become a bridge between worlds, proving that understanding was possible when people approached each other with honor and mutual respect. The story of Marcus Sullivan's adoption would spread far beyond the Apache reservation, influencing government policies and changing attitudes on both sides of the cultural divide. But for the man himself, the greatest reward was simpler and more profound. He had found a place where his actions mattered, where courage was recognized regardless of the color of a man's skin, and where a mother's love could transcend the hatred that had divided two peoples for far too long.